I'm happy I
Okay,
have my pretty shirt on.
that's good. You gotta look good while you're doing it. You get an excuse to, look good.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, I said that and then somebody jumped in. So okay, so here's Naama. She is an importer for this wine, and she knows Portuguese wine a lot better than I do. It's an area of the world that I would love to get over to, and I'm excited to learn more about today. And so with that, I'll let you start by maybe discussing how you got into. I mean, you can start back with how you got into wine, and then how you came to be bringing Portuguese wine to us.
Wonderful. I'll do that. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this lovely Saturday afternoon. It's actually Saturday, almost evening here in New York, but Saturday afternoon, I think, by you. So this is, kind of our crazy little company. My husband and I, so my husband is Luis. Luis is the Portuguese counterpart of the business. My husband and I decided to create NLC Wines, which is an importer that focuses exclusively on Portuguese wine, even more niche. So we are focusing on Portuguese wine, boutique, small family estate Portuguese wine, and also Portuguese wines that are only made with indigenous grapes. So only grapes that are indigenous to Portugal. Also, the majority, like 99.9% of the wines that we're bringing in are all sustainable, and we'll talk a little bit about that word. I'm not a huge fan of using the word sustainable because I think that it's kind of, it's been mushed up a little bit, but let's say that they do a lot of very clean farming. And they all abide by a series of norms that were dictated by the European Union called integrated protection or integrated production. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But that's pretty much a system of norms that was put in place so that any kind of farming, so whether it's grapes or apples or what have you, cotton, rice, all of those items would be farmed within the ecosystem that they are farmed in a conscientious way to the ecosystem where they're planted. So the goal of this is obviously to make clean, pure, sustainable wine. And so why we decided to do this, and we started the company, we brought in our first container in 2012. And so it's been a few years. We're still babies in this business, but the only thing we still bring in is we're still working with indigenous grapes, Portuguese wine, small family estates. And it was a little bit of a crazy passion project. I mean, Luis grew up in Portugal, so everyone and their mother has a little corner of vineyard. If it's not vineyard, it's olives to make olive oil. So it was going to be one or the other. So we went for wine, mostly because that's really what we were drinking every night. And we decided, there was a hole in the marketplace. Very few people knew about Portuguese wines. And although there were a few Portuguese wines in the market that people know, for example, port wine, it's from Portugal. Although a lot of people don't even think that it's Portuguese wine, they just say, oh, it's port wine. It's, fortified port, like Christmas wine. And that's from Portugal. And there was also a category of wine called Vinho Verde. So I think we'll be talking a little bit about Vinho Verde today. But those were really the only two regions of wine that were even somewhat known, less than 10 years ago here in the United States. And so Luis and I kind of put on our big boy pants and said, okay, we're making this happen. Let's bring in a crazy selection of wines. Nobody's going to know what hit them. Nobody's going to know how to pronounce the grapes, and we're just going to jump in and bring in some very cool projects and support some family estates that have been making wines in individual regions of Portugal for many years. So that's what we did. So a few years later, we're really happy that we teamed up with a wine trust for a few of their markets, and we are starting little by little to build a little bit of our Portuguese portfolio with a wine trust. So I think that the wines, and James, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the wines that we are going to be talking about today, or that are already in the market, are Quinta do Regueiro, Alvarinho Trajadura, yeah,
Yep.
the Casal do Ramilo wine.
Yep. Which is the ones we're
Jackpot.
drinking. Yeah, we have Jackpot, but we're not drinking Jackpot. We're drinking the Romillo Tinto.
You're drinking Romillo, but you guys okay?
Yeah, we have the Jackpot. We don't have the other out here west yet, but they're in theory coming. But you're welcome to talk about any of the wines that you have a passion for or bring in, because I mean, well, I can
chat my way.
Well, maybe it creates a demand. Maybe all these people are like, well, James, I bring this one out here. You better give Brian a call.
I agree. That's a great idea. All right, and then we'll also be talking about Sol Real, which is the newest addition to the Wine Trust family, which is also Vinho Verde, but it is a different style. So it's we're going to be talking about two different styles of Vinho Verde, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. So I'm going to share my screen. So I put together a little presentation. Now, just a quick note. I mean, really, the presentation is mostly pictures and a couple of blah blahs, but please feel free to like raise hands or like make crazy movement if you have any questions, so that James can unmute you and you can ask, because there is a lot of information in this brain of mine, but sometimes I go too fast or sometimes I go too slowly. So if you guys feel like, okay, let's get the rhythm going, just let me know. All right? Okay. So let us share the screen. Give me 1 second. Oh, can you enable my screen sharing?
Let's see.
I'm just one of the attendees.
Yeah, no.
I'll be the only one sharing, people. No sharing of screens for you guys. Okay, let's see.
So question is, why won't it let me do that? Do you know, do any of you know how to allow her to do that?
So this is Corey. If you go to the bottom where it says security, click on that button, and then there's a thing that says allow participants to share screen.
Oh man, okay.
And then when you have a moment, you can share my video back up.
Yeah, we're working off an iPad. I don't see that there. Unmuted participants share content. That's where you. I know.
So what we could. Let's see.
Sorry guys, we're rank amateurs at this.
Yeah, I'm real bad at this, but give us 1 second.
Okay, and then maybe what I could also do, James, is I can send you the presentation via WeTransfer, if that's easier.
That we could probably do.
Okay, so let me work on that. Just a little technical difficulty. But I think
walking technical difficulty.
What's that?
I'm a walking technical difficulty. Technology and I are not.
That's great.
This is like the number one thing that popped up though. Click the share screen button located in your main toolbar. Select the screen you want to share. Now that's for you. Not sharing your screen.
So what is going to be hopefully information about this presentation is that Portugal, although is a very small country, has a lot of different regions, and the wines in Portugal are very region specific. So while you might find if here in New York, for example, you'll find wines from everywhere, or even in California, although it's dominant, you'll find California wines. Washington, I'm sure you'll find Washington wine, but you do find some variety. The challenge in Portugal is that, in fact, you find very little variety. So, excuse me. So mostly what we end up getting are wines that you have to go to that specific region to explore.
See if that did it for you.
Okay, let's see. I think that worked.
Okay.
Yay. So now can you do me the second favor of just putting my maybe my video back up?
Yeah, sorry.
Sure.
There.
All right. Can everyone see the screen? A little like thumbs up? Yeah. Woohoo. Okay. All right. I'm back. Okay, good.
That's
Perfect.
That's the face. That's
Okay,
the one we're
that
looking
only
for.
took a few minutes. That's actually pretty good.
Success. Everyone's still here? Everyone's still here with us? Good. All right. So as I was saying, in Portugal, and what I'll do is we'll start kind of giving a little bit of a, this is Portugal map. So the one thing that for those geography buffs that you will notice, although this map is from the Wines of Portugal archives, Madeira and Açores on the bottom right here, should really not be here. They should be over here in the middle of the ocean, because in fact over here is Spain. So do you guys see my pointer when I'm pointing? Yeah, okay, good. So Spain borders Portugal. You're gonna see it. You're gonna see with a pointer. Spain borders all of this. All of this is Spain right here. So Portugal has a unique characteristic in terms of winemaking, which is that it is right alongside the Atlantic Ocean. And if you see right here, this area is all the Atlantic Ocean. Look at the quantity of regions that are along the ocean. Down here, sorry, down here we have the Algarve. So you can grab this part of the Algarve, which is coastal. We have a part of Alentejo, which is coastal. We have Setúbal, which is coastal. We have Lisbon, which is coastal. We have, we don't have Tejo. We have Bairrada, which is coastal, and Vinho Verde. So that means that we have a tremendous percentage of wines in Portugal that are gonna have characteristics of maritime wines. So when I say maritime wines, wines that have some kind of ocean influence, and in Portugal, that means that wines along that coast will be super fresh, will almost have like a saltiness to them, which a lot of people feel when you drink a wine and you feel like your mouth is watering. That's what I mean about a saltiness to the wine. And they're going to be, I'm going to use a word that's sometimes like a jargon word that we use in wine, which is lifted. They're going to feel very lifted. So besides the fact that they're fresh, meaning that they have great acidity, they're very lifted and that you feel like the wine is not heavy on your tongue. So when you're looking for that style of wine, this is really, Portugal over delivers in a lot of different regions of wine. And I'm super happy because in fact, today we're talking about Vinho Verde right here. So again, coastal. We're going to be talking, and we're going to be talking about Lisbon right here. We're also going to, I'm going to mention the Bairrada, because even though we don't have right now in Washington, I believe, the sparkling wines from the Bairrada that the Wine Trust works on the East Coast with, you never know whether that demand will justify, but more so to give you guys a little bit more of a holistic education on what's coming out of Portugal. So in some wonderful way, we're going to be really tasting kind of the cream of the crop of Portugal in terms of freshness, again, which means acidity, salinity, or a little bit of more of like that mouth wateringness, and lifted wines. So wines that are not going to be heavy on your tongue, but are going to be quite open, very fresh. And I would say that sometimes you might recognize those wines as being light-bodied or medium-bodied. So these are not going to be very big-bodied wines. Yes, good. Should we continue? All right, I see heads shaking. Okay. So, and we can always refer back to this map, but this is a little bit of a kind of situate ourselves a little bit. Again, this is the ocean right here. Over here, this is Portugal. This is Spain. These islands should be in the middle of the Atlantic over here. And we're going to be focusing on wines along the Atlantic coast. All right. Oh, look at that freshness. Good. So we're going to start up in the northernmost part of Portugal in Vinho Verde. So just give you guys back a little idea right here, that lighter green area, Vinho Verde. Vinho Verde is a region of wine that a lot of people in the United States recognize for a style of wine that is a wine that has low alcohol usually and is a little fizzy. Have you guys had wines like that are a little like lower alcohol, a little fizzy? So those wines are one of the most recognized wines from the region of Vinho Verde. The reason that they're a little fizzy is that they have CO2 injected into them, so carbon dioxide injected into them. But the reason for that is that historically Vinho Verde as a region, and Vinho Verde comes from green wine, which actually means young wine. Vinho Verde was harvested in September, but a lot of it was home production. And so you had a very spontaneous fermentation of the wine, which leads to a little bit of that fizziness in the wine. And usually it was the first wine to be enjoyed or had. And so historically, Vinho Verde was kind of the wine of the people, the first wine had, and a little bit of that fizziness was in big part due to that spontaneous fermentation with no temperature control. So right now, a lot of winemakers and winemaking really want to control their temperature when the grapes come in from the vineyard, because by controlling the temperature, they control when and how fast that fermentation starts happening. So historically, that was not the case, and ergo we have Vinho Verde. But of course, now we're talking about lots and lots and lots and lots of bottles of Vinho Verde. So allowing that really beautiful, romantic, spontaneous fermentation is no longer possible. Enter CO2. So going back to kind of giving a very quick overview of Vinho Verde, I have a couple of interesting notes here for terroir. For those who don't know, terroir doesn't just mean the land, it means everything about where that vine grows. So whether that's wind, that's the sun exposure, that is the type of soil, that is how much water that land gets. So even the ecosystem, so even the bugs that are there, the animals that are around the vine. So all of that is terroir. And here we get from Vinho Verde an area that's very similar to a lot of other areas in Portugal, which means it's a microclimate. So it's an area that is almost like a whole little like beast in its own. Really, really cold winters up in the north of Portugal, relatively average rainfall with very hot, dry summers. That's what Vinho Verde is all about. The grapes tend to mature early. Again, we get a lot of sun, a lot of heat. So the grapes mature early, and they pull them as fast as they can. And then they're sent to different cellars and
I guess let's give her a second to come back. Assuming New York is still there. Maybe New York disappeared. I don't know.
That would be unfortunate.
Yeah, so Vinho Verde is kind of an interesting region. It's not one that I had to tackle it relatively in depth when we were studying, but not as deep as some. Oh,
There she is.
She came back. But one thing that's
I'm so sorry.
perfect.
No worries.
It's like I have lost everybody. All right, let me go back to the presentation. All right, I'm back. All right. So I don't know where we left off. I was just talking and talking, but so I was saying that in Vinho Verde there are two different regions of wine. There's one region of wine, two different styles of wine. Did you guys hear that bit? Yes? No? Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have now, so one way or the other.
Okay, good. All right. So with those two different styles of wine, you have one wine that is the fun, fizzy wine that we'll be talking a little bit about today. And then you have another wine, which is a very old school style of wine that was made in Vinho Verde called Alvarinho. Now, Alvarinho, a really beautiful grape right there of Alvarinho. Alvarinho is the same exact grape that exists in Spain as Albariño. So if you've had the Albariño grape from Spain, you're going to notice some similarities. However, what you will notice is that the Alvarinho from Portugal has a little bit more of a silkier feel to it. And again, tends to be more lifted, fresher, more acidity, and more lifted. And so Alvarinho loves living in Vinho Verde. And so in Vinho Verde region, we have those two different styles of wine. So we're going to start talking about old school Alvarinho, and then we're going to lead into the fun, fizzy stuff. So for old school Alvarinho, we're talking about Quinta do Regueiro. And Quinta do Regueiro is a producer that we've been working with now for almost since the beginning, so about 7 years. He's a young producer who inherited the land from his parents. And the land that he inherited was his backyard, pretty much. And so the family had a house. There was a good chunk of land in his backyard. And he said, you know, let me start planting some Alvarinho here. Something to keep a note on is Alvarinho is a grape that grows in height. So you don't need a lot of land. What you really need is kind of the sky. So if you're able to trellis it up, that's what Alvarinho needs most of anything else. And so Paulo Rodrigues, who's the producer of Quinta do Regueiro, decided that that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to create the best Alvarinhos, make the best Alvarinhos that the region has seen. This was in the late 1980s. So fast forward a few years, he is in fact making some of the best Alvarinhos in Portugal. This year, he was actually named, his wine was actually named Wine of the Year in Portugal. So not this wine that we're tasting, another one of his wines, but he really has grown so fast and so beautifully. And he's very particular about the wines that he makes. He doesn't want to mess anything up. He only works with Alvarinho and another grape called Trajadura. Trajadura is the grape that will bring a lot of acidity to this blend that we're going to be talking about. And Alvarinho as a grape brings a lot of like floral aromas, like a beautiful, that silky feeling that's going to be the Alvarinho, and that weight. So when you feel like your mouth is full of wine, that's going to be Alvarinho talking. But the Trajadura brings in a lot of that freshness, that acidity that we love from Vinho Verde, from that region. So here, okay, good. So this is a wine. And apologies here for the vintage. So right now we're on vintage 2019. What did you guys get? Do you guys still have 2018 or 2019?
We have the 18. 18? What's that ball? Where's the ball go?
18?
Yeah, 18. It's 18? Yeah.
Okay, 18. Good.
Yeah, I think we're actually converting. So I think we're on 18, finishing up 18, and the East Coast might be going to 19.
Okay, cool. So our goal always for the Quinta do Regueiro wines is if I could hold them back for at least a year, all of them, I would do that. But unfortunately, my husband is a finance guy of our operation, and he does not allow me to keep the wines sitting for so long. And so with Quinta do Regueiro Alvarinho Trajadura, the older the wine, the better. Alvarinho grows up tremendously in the bottle. And because it's a young wine, because it's harvested early, because it's bottled so early, the more time that it could have in the bottle, it just does wonders for it. It becomes even softer. The acidity is so present there, but it almost, when people talk about, do you guys understand the term? I mean, for those who don't, I'll give a little bit of an explanation, even though I don't think it has quite a description, the term minerality. So minerality is a crazy little term. James is giggling, I don't know why, It's
because no one understands that term. A master sommelier or a master wine doesn't really understand that term.
yeah. So it's a term. It
I
has
use
a
it.
crappy name.
Yeah. Well, it's just very broad.
It's very broad, and I think that I'll use the term minerality, but I'll explain a little bit more what I feel about it. So it's not really minerality; it's more, I'll explain. So when rain hits a stone with like earth around it, I get a smell. It almost smells like earth mixed with like a stone, like a slatiness to it. And when I think minerality, that's what I think of. So I think of rain hitting stone. And this wine has a lot of that, almost that smell of like wild earth during a rainstorm. I don't taste it so much as really smell it. So that's why I always say intensely mineral profile. It's a word that I think some people recognize and they're like, oh, mineral. Okay, I got it. It's like stones and earth and, rain. So I just keep using it for a bit until somebody can find a better term for it. But this wine is very much that. It is crazy good. Lots of floral aromas, orange peel. And one of the treats with this wine is how clean it is in your mouth, how fresh, how lifted, how much freshness, how much acidity it has. And the Alvarinho kind of kicks it up a notch and makes this wine, even though this is kind of one of the entry level of the house of Quinta do Regueiro, makes this wine very, very elegant. And so it's bright, it's citrusy, it has this minerality to it, but the Alvarinho lends a very elegant sophistication to this wine, which is one of the reasons I love it so.
Yeah, it's a killer. It's a really good wine. It's I don't think it's only my opinion, but it's probably my favorite white wine for the value. The book, it's killer. You ask me for it, and I find a way to make that happen for you. That's how you get it. And I would love to get that to anybody who wants it. I probably would have used that one if I hadn't promised everybody Reds.
Sorry, guys. All right, I'll jump.
Could I go? No, I mean, I think people. I mean, if you like wine, that's a really great wine to try, and I would highly recommend it. I think Alvarinho is a really cool grape, and I think it's been a little bit slow to pick up because we have so few examples that aren't the simpler Vinho Verde type. And I think if people had more experience with that, they would probably be way more interested in buying it. So hopefully that picks up. Can we go back? You were saying that they trellis tall. Do you know what type of trellising they use? I know they at one point used pergola up in Vinho Verde, and I know they've I think gone away from that. But do they still use some of the really the taller trellising, or have they kind of gone to the cordon or guillot setup?
So for to answer that, I'm going to go back a little bit here. Historically, Vinho Verde and the Douro, so the two more, and Trás-os-Montes, which are the three most northern regions of Portugal, have been and continue to be the poorest regions of Portugal. And so you had everyone, the only thing you had was land. And the only thing that you were able to do with your land is plant food for your personal consumption. You were not selling, it was just for your personal consumption. So with the limited land that people had, what they ended up doing was that they created almost a block. Let's say your land is in the shape of a rectangle. So all around the rectangle, you plant Vinho Verde. They planted the grapes of Vinho Verde, Alvarinho, Trajadura, Arinto, Loureiro, et cetera, et cetera. So a selection of grapes. Again, they didn't have a lot of space, and so they had to plant it in altitude. Those same vines, and then the grapes, the leaves of the vines, gave a little bit of a protection from the sun from everything else that was planted beneath it. And so they ended up then planting potatoes, and then onions, and then in kind of like lines around the vines. And then in the middle, they planted whatever needed, a dominant amount of sun. And so because historically that's what they had to do with those Vinho Verde, with those vines, is growing them in altitude, that's what they've continued to do. So yeah, it's like trellis, it's pergolas. It's every producer has a slightly different technique for those vines, but dominantly what you will see is altitude. You have producers who have created, in fact, Quinta do Regueiro. I'm not going to go into too much technical information, but Quinta do Regueiro created a system in which the vine, so the root is about 2 meters up, so almost 2 meters up from the soil, which is 6 feet, so that's pretty high up. And he connects the vines, so the vines are holding the vines up. Does that make sense? So imagine you have, so this is one vine, this is another one, and then you have shoots like that are going in this direction. Those are connected. And then you have shoots that are then going that direction, and those are connected. And so even though each plant is an individual plant and giving individual grapes, the vines are holding each other up by, and therefore going up in altitude that way, as opposed to being, you know, in any specific, like mounted on anything specifically.
That's so cool. If you if you have a picture of that at any point, you just send it to me. I'd love to see that.
I've taken so many pictures. I'll find it. I'll send you your way.
Thanks.
Okay, so I was going to continue on with Vinho Verde, but maybe we should go to the red, since that's what everybody's drinking, and then we'll double back down and go down to like fun Vinho Verde. Yes? All right. Okay, and that's going to be the fun Vinho Verde. Okay, moving. So for the reds, we are, so can you just remind me, which red does everyone have, the Romillo or the Jackpot?
The Romillo.
Okay. Superb. Okay, so Lisbon, and let me just very quickly go back here. So we're up here, we started up here in Vinho Verde, the light green, and now we're gonna go all the way down here to Lisbon. Lisbon, again, super coastal, capital of Portugal, capital of tourism right now. Well, between Lisbon and Porto, those were the two main cities where people were heading before we landed in this lovely situation. Lisbon has a tremendous history of wine. So Lisbon historically, because of where it was, so you saw that it was right on the ocean, was one of the main ports of entry and exit. And being one of the main ports, one of the main goods that went on these ships was wine. So Lisbon became a very important part of Portuguese wine business, because grapes originally, but wine didn't hold very well. So you couldn't really ship it long distances. There's no way really to keep those wines. I mean, we're talking about many, many, many years ago. And so Lisbon became a hub for co-ops who planted a lot of grapes, and they also purchased a lot of grapes from smaller producers and made wine. That wine was shipped to the colonies, which was one of the big markets, and then shipped to other parts of Portugal as well. Shipped to several colonies, actually, everything from Macau all the way to Brazil, all the way down to Angola. So Lisbon became a hub for send out of that wine to the colonies. The challenge with that was that the co-ops dominated Lisbon. And so you had a lot of wine, but it wasn't necessarily great wine, because it was kind of mass produced and mass acquired. And that took a while to kind of move forward and move away from that in Lisbon. But today, we have several families, smaller winemaking families that were either around for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years or more, or who felt that they wanted to go back to Lisbon winemaking and Lisbon vineyards. And so Casal do Romillo, which is what you guys are tasting today, is one of those wonderful examples. The Romillo family, let me see, yeah. The Romillo family since the early 1930s, has been producing wines in that same vineyard. The luxury of this is that we have a family, so we're now on the third generation, a family that understands these vines, understands the region, has a significant amount of old vines as well, which is quite rare for Lisbon. Again, because most of the co-ops wanted big production wines, they did not want old vines. Old vines give beautiful juice, very textured juice, but old vines give little grapes. And so when you want to sell a lot of grape, you need young vines. So a lot of the old vines in Lisbon were just kind of cut off and you know, given up for new plantings of fresh vine. And so when you find a family like Romillo that, you know, they have some vines that are 60, 70, 80 years old, that's quite a rarity in Lisbon. Another rarity is that the Romillo family has a son, Nuno, who said, we have incredible grapes. Like, we don't want to sell these bulk anymore. We don't want to sell this juice to co-ops. We don't want to sell this juice in, you know, big bottle format. He launched the first release of the Romillo Curated that you're having in 2012. So starting in 2012, Nuno decided, like, let's get something going. Let's see how this does. And in fact, the wine that was bottled by them under his purview was and continues to be really fantastic. On a kind of a side personal importer note, very often when we're looking at wines, one of the first things we have to think about is, okay, this is a great wine and it's a beautiful label, but what's the price? Because, you know, at the end of the day, this is a price game. And we need to make sure that there aren't too many wines in that same price point in our portfolio. So Lisa and I tasted these wines and we looked at each other, and the number that we gave for what we would have paid for this bottle was twice what it actually is. So on our end, that's what we would have done. We would have paid twice what this wine is now, because it is not often that we've tasted a wine like this, much less coming from Lisbon. These wines, I have a little bit of a little information here on, let me see if I can you guys read that? Yeah, okay, good. These wines are in a very special place in Lisbon, because Lisbon is a little bit like Rome. So there are a lot of hills around Lisbon. And wines that are planted at sea level tend to get a lot of heat and a lot of sun. And so you have wines that tend to be a little more saturated, lots of fruit, a little juicier, maybe a little bit more like Napa cabs. That's what you would find Lisbon sea level. However, as you go up a little bit in altitude, so along the hills in Lisbon, that you get that freshness, that acidity, that kind of that lifted that I was talking about at the beginning. That's what you get in the hills. And so Romillo is one of these unique producers that actually has their vines planted up on the hills. Between Colares and Mafra. Colares is a special wine region in Sintra, which is up on like a magical place in Lisbon. Oh my God, it just feels like a fairy tale every time you go there. Mafra has one of the most impressive convents that I've ever been to. Really, really beautiful. Anyway, so these vines are right between these two special locations. Super maritime, like one of the most westernmost points in continental Europe. So they're pretty much on the ocean, but in altitude. And so we're getting, along with this land with a temperate climate, which is very important here, the temperate climate, super rocky soils. There's like, it's actually a combination of like clay and limestone, the soils. And you end up having beautiful wines like Romillo. Okay. So with Romillo, we actually worked on a private label, which is Jackpot, but we can talk a little bit about that before, a little later if we have time. So we'll focus on the Romillo's entry level. And one of the reasons why when we first tasted this wine, we were just completely like, wow, is Lisbon, the two grapes that are in here are Touriga Nacional and Aragonés. So it's 50% of each. Touriga Nacional, if you remember anything today, just remember Touriga Nacional. That's the grape to remember from Portugal. So Touriga is the kind of the king and queen grape of Portugal. It is planted, it's one of the most widely planted grapes. And it's planted almost everywhere in Portugal. But depending on where it is in Portugal, it actually expresses itself very differently. So in the north of Portugal, it is one of the primary grapes in port wine. And Touriga Nacional lends a lot of like that jamminess that port has. That's Touriga Nacional. As you start going further down south, Touriga Nacional, however, converts and becomes much more floral, much more violety. And in Lisbon, we get that softer, I dare say, more feminine Touriga Nacional. That's a whole different conversation about feminine and masculine grapes, but I'll leave that with a little bit more feminine when it comes to Lisbon, with that floral expression. And the other grape, Aragonés, is best known, or you might know it best as Tempranillo. Tempranillo in Portugal, Tempranillo in Portugal is Aragonés more in the south, so in the middle and the south, and in the north, it's called Tinta Roriz. Same grape, different names because that's Portugal. We have a gazillion different names for the same grape. And Aragonés comes here also to lend a lot of the freshness for this wine and that acidity. So when I say freshness, that's a little bit more what I mean is the acidity. Touriga Nacional comes in here with like the balls of the wine and a little bit of that floral side. And Aragonés brings in a lot of elegance, acidity, freshness. And so having a blend of those two, specifically in Lisbon, where you get so much freshness, is a big, it's a really, really big treat. Romillo, depending on the year, in terms of aging, he sometimes ages it in oak, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he just does stainless steel, sometimes he does French oak, sometimes he does American. In fact, he in 2016 put 50% of the lot in 5-year-old French oak. So, and that's why you probably are not going to taste much of the French oak at all in here. It tastes very fresh as a wine, but that little bit of that roundness that we feel, when we taste Touriga Nacional tends to be very tannic. And so he wanted to give it a little bit more of a roundness, and that is the Touriga Nacional with a little bit of that oak treatment in it. Also, a note on Romillo, and we didn't speak about this a little earlier, but Romillo for the last 2 years has also been doing biodynamic farming. So he's not certified biodynamic simply because it's just too expensive to get the certification. He's just farming because that's what he believes in doing. So it's a little bit of a middle between biodynamic and organic. But he's one of the cleanest wines in our portfolio. I mean, he pretty much doesn't do any intervention whatsoever. Everything is indigenous yeast. For those who are nervous or concerned or even curious about sulfites, the levels of Romillo, do you guys know what sulfites are in wine? I explain sulfites, but there are sulfites in wine. There are actually a lot of naturally occurring sulfites, even the most natural of wines. It's natural, but most wines have sulfites added to them at bottling to maintain freshness. So an interesting note with Portugal in general, if you are somebody who doesn't really, or who are sensitive to sulfites, who don't like sulfites, Portuguese wines legally have a lower threshold of sulfites than American wines, for example. So just to keep in mind, you're always going to get less sulfites in Portugal. Romillo specifically only adds a very tiny amount at bottling for any of their wines. So pretty natural in terms of winemaking, even though that's definitely far from his positioning. Romillo, any questions there? Any curiosities? Nothing? Keep going. I'll just keep going. So you guys have been tasting Romillo, right? Is that what everyone has in their glass?
Correct.
So thoughts? What do you guys think?
I mean, I obviously liked it. I picked it. So
I like it. I have nothing to say about it.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great one. This is only the second time I've had a chance to try it. And Romillo came on to the portfolio right as I left the wine trust. So I unfortunately missed out on getting to sell it. James is like, yeah, it's fantastic.
Oh,
So
good.
that's okay. But yeah, I love the way that it, as it opens up, like it gets this really bright red fruit right out the gate. And then you get this nice spicy notes as it kind of develops in the glass. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's a little. I mean, it's a little tight still. The 16 is a little tight still. Even even 4 years old. I think it's just a wine that maybe still a couple of years from kind of its peak, where I think it's still gonna develop really nicely in bottle.
Yeah, it definitely has that potential. And just so you guys know, the 2016 is the current vintage, so it's not like, he's releasing these wines with age already. So the treat for us is that these are somewhat pre-cellared. A lot of wineries have the need, which is normal, we made a harvest, we've made the wine, and we need to sell it like now. He sits on it because he also very much what you said believes that, especially with the Touriga Nacional, it is a grape that needs time. Yeah. All right. Any other comments of all the lovely folks that are in attendance today?
I mean, lots of nice superlative comments. Let's see. What did I say? Hold on. Yeah, I mean, everybody there's a lot of positive feedback. Love it. So
Yay, positive feedback. Love it. Okay, good. All right, so where do you guys want to go to next? Should we talk Jackpot or should we talk Sol Real Vinho Verde?
Talk about Jackpot.
Jackpot, sure. So Jackpot's our little baby. So we're really happy with Jackpot. And now we're in 2018, so apologies for that little typo. Jackpot kind of came about because we wanted to work with, we wanted to create a wine. Oh, excuse me, one quick second. Oh, my son is joining here for a second. Hi. Oh, sorry about that. This is Noah. Noah is 6.5 years old. He's been swimming all day.
You were swimming all day?
Say hi.
I wish I was swimming all day.
A good way to spend a day.
I agree. Yes, it's reaching the end of the day. Okay, so Jackpot came about because we wanted to create a wine that was very indigenous to Portugal. Obviously, we wanted something that was very true to what Portugal was all about. But we didn't want oak. We only wanted indigenous grape varietals. And we wanted a wine that had that freshness and that brightness that we've been talking about. And so we kind of started narrowing it down regions. And we said, well, clearly it has to be from Lisbon. And so that took us on to the next hunt, which was, okay, if it's from Lisbon, who are we going to work together? Who are we going to work with to create Jackpot? And we had a fantastic conversation with Nuno about 3 years ago, and he looked at us and he's like, why aren't you working with me on this wine? I have the grapes. I've been selling them, so I have them available, and we immediately got very excited because, in fact, his wines are across the board some of the most unique wines, and we were able to continue working with his Aragonés grape, which is Tempranillo, and what we added to Jackpot, which is the majority is Aragonés, again Tempranillo, but what we added to Jackpot was a grape called Castelão, which has a lot of like nasally sounds. And Castelão is a grape that has a lot of fruit, but that's pretty much kind of what it has. It just has fruit. And so there's not a very big percentage of Castelão, but Castelão added exactly that fruit forwardness that we needed to counteract kind of, or to be a counterpart to the acidity and the freshness of Aragonés. So that's a little bit how Jackpot came about. And people are like, Jackpot, why the name Jackpot? It has like nothing to do with anything. And our, excuse me, our response was, well, the reason that Jackpot came about as a name is that Lisbon actually has one of the oldest casinos still in operation in Europe. So one of the oldest European casinos in operation is in Lisbon. And we thought, okay, what's a name that makes sense for us? That's kind of funny, that we kind of feel loose and fun about, but that would also work for the US market, because as you guys have probably already noticed, is Portugal, with the Portuguese name, so the Portuguese grapes, half of the pronunciation just gets crapped out. And so with Jackpot, we felt, okay, this is the name people can pronounce. Like, even if they can't get to the grapes, like they'll get to Jackpot. And so ergo Jackpot entered in. But I would say that Romillo and Jackpot are quite different. Once you get to Jackpot, Jackpot's a little fresher, a little lighter on its feet. The kind of that violety note is also there, interestingly, not from the Touriga Nacional, but it's a little more candied violet. So there's much more fruit, like more juiciness to the wine. It doesn't necessarily have the elegance that the Romillo has, but it's just so fun and so juicy and fresh, and just as dry. So you guys have to ask for Jackpot next. Jackpot's going to be fun. All right, Jackpot. All right, so you already have a huge order from Jackpot, right? For Jackpot.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for him. It'll be coming in. Pierce is like, yeah, that needs to, before you even talked about the casino, he's like, that needs to be in Vegas and Reno, like now. Yeah.
Like yesterday now, yeah, but still, we're still talking about a small producer. So although we would love these wines to be everywhere. Sorry, we would love these wines to be everywhere. A wine like Jackpot, 10,000 bottles.
Yeah. Yep.
That's it. That's the production of Jackpot. So it's low for those who, if we're talking about a high production wine, we're talking about the millions. And in this case, 10,000 bottles is very, very low.
I mean, it's 2,500 casinos.
2,500 casinos can have 4 bottles. Yeah, perfect.
Just that. That's it.
That's your allocation.
No more for you.
Sorry, you hit the jackpot.
Oh. But this is the wine. I don't know what your price point is, but this is the wine that from kind of the east to the west coast right now has been hitting at, it's like below 14 at retail.
Yeah, I think that's probably right around where we come in. It's maybe just a touch higher because of shipping across the continent, but it's right in that ballpark.
Yeah. So it really, it's one of these case buys that we've noticed. People just like, oh, this is going to be our house wine and done. Let's just get it, which is wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Any fun little questions on Jackpot?
I mean, did you kind of pursue which grapes you wanted, or did he kind of recommend them? I know he had them, but he obviously has a number of different ones. How did you guys go about blending what you want together?
I think that this process was even easier than we thought it was going to be for a simple reason that we told him. We've been working with Nuno for a few years. So when we told him, like, this is what we're looking for. We want what we just said, it has to be fresh. I want the fruit in front, we want the fruit in front. We just want the indigenous grapes that all of these things put together, and it has to be in stainless steel with no oak. He gave us 4 options. Like he already did the blends, and he said, we knew more or less the grapes that he had available. For this project. We knew that we didn't want Touriga Nacional in there because Touriga is a very expensive grape, but also it's a very big grape. You really need to work it. And this was a wine that we wanted to have fun with. We did not want it to be a brainy wine or a nerdy wine. We just wanted us to have fun with it. Have a very great, easy barbecue wine that everyone would love. That's Jackpot. And so he gave us 4. He pretty much gave us 4 blends, and he's like, "So, I've been working around with these wines. I don't know. I kind of, I played, and what do you think? Very humble, very much like, let's take let's get this going. Let's see if this is one of them." And of course, it was one of those 4. So it was in some ways very easy, very very easy working with him.
As good as it gets.
But I think that, what's that?
That's as good as it gets.
Yeah, man. I think that this only happens though it's kind of a unique situation. Only happens when you have you know somebody for a while and you have that relationship, and it's almost like we almost could have said nothing, and he probably would have come up with a very similar blend already. You know, we from the get-go, we have been very particular about the wines that we want in our portfolio, because it's our face. You know, these are wines that are going to be at our dinner table, every single one of them. And in fact, one of the things that we've been doing now during this quarantine time is we've been eating a lot, like everybody else. We've been drinking a little bit as well. But every time that we have an opportunity to experience re-experience almost one of our wines, and we pair it with food, we always post on Instagram. It's almost a little bit like falling in love with these wines again, but also an opportunity to kind of go back to showing how focused we are in these wines. Like, these are all wines that belong at our dinner table. And everything from Jackpot and Sol Real all the way to some of our fancier wines. Like, that's what we want. We want wines to drink. Every single one of them has a slightly different reason for being, but we want to be able to have them at dinner.
I'm gonna have to have you put a case of the fancier wines on one of the palettes for me, so I can try.
Yeah, dude. There's some good fancy wines. Portugal makes some good fancy wines.
Portugal makes a lot.
Yeah, but a lot with age. I think that's one of the treats with Portugal, is that you can find some producers who just have been sitting on wine. You know, either they haven't sold in Portugal, or they haven't found a distributor or anyone necessarily interested. On a personal note, I'm very partial towards older wines. So I really like the secondary and the tertiary notes of older wines. And so when we have opportunities to grab, you know, even if it's just a palette of those wines, we do, because it's kind of, it's a moment of time. You know, it's like drinking a wine that happened in that moment. And I think that's just such a unique experience that.
Anyway. No, that's very much how I feel also. The last one we had was we actually were drinking an aged Washington producer. It was 2005, so it was kind of fun. You get to kind of experience those, like you said, moments in time, or what was happening, you know, back then, and how they produced wine then may be different than how they produce it now. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah, and like back to the conversation that we had at the beginning with terroir. You know, how's the land changing? How's the weather changing? How is all of that affecting the wine that we're drinking? It could be from the exact same vineyard, but it's possibly very likely a very different wine. And if it's not, that's a little scary too. But you know, wines are very, they operate with whatever the vintage is. We bring in some very old wines from this region, Colares, which I was telling you guys about earlier, which is kind of where Romillo is. So we bring like a 1934 and 1969 and a few like of those older vintages. And those wines are fantastic. But when we open one of those bottles, it's like we almost feel like we have to talk to the wine before we drink it. Like, hey, you've been in there for a few years. Like, let me tell you what's been going on. Because the world is in a slightly different place since it was in 1934.
That's crazy. That's so cool.
It really is. It's like you have this incredible opportunity of drinking history. It's incredible. It's incredible. Anyway, some wines are like that. And then, you know, we have other wines that are the fun wines that are, you know, back to, I'll finish off talking a little bit about Sol Real, like wines like this, which you will want to enjoy all summer long. This is Vinho Verde, but this is like the fun, fizzy Vinho Verde, low alcohol, fun, juicy, fresh, super, super easy. And there's a spot for that too. So at our dinner table, there's a spot for a 1934, and there's a spot for this fun Vinho Verde. When we were looking, this is also our private label Vinho Verde. And when we were looking to bring in something from this region, we wanted to be bringing in a wine that it was the wines that we drink while we're in Portugal. So not wines that, a lot of the Vinho Verde that lands in the United States are wines that have a lot of sugar added to them, a lot of carbonation added to them. I think that that's what a lot of those producers felt that the market was interested in here, and they sold a lot of wine. Vinho Verde, the United States is one of the main importers, for Vinho Verde in the world. But we wanted to bring in the wine that we had when we're in Portugal. And, you know, outside of what's happening now, between Luis and I, we're in Portugal usually about 3 times a year. Kind of, we're here, our kids go to school, and, you know, we have to kind of sit tight as much as we can, but we do go back and forth a little bit if the situation is there. But so the wine that we drink there is a wine that, yes, has some carbonation, because as I mentioned a little earlier, historically, that happened through spontaneous fermentation. That is hard to keep on a larger production scale. But these wines also have, they're dry. They're wines to have with food. They're not only wines to just, you know, pop open and drink on their own. In fact, if they're very sweet, you have a glass and you're done. Doesn't matter how cold it is. And so those are the things that we were looking at when we brought in our Vinho Verde. We wanted less carbonation, so less CO2, and that's like a pressure. So we actually have less than a bar of pressure of CO2 in these wines, which means that they're fizzy, but they're very, very lightly fizzy. Someone the other day asked, "Is this a pet nat?" And I'm like, "No, it's not trendy like a pet nat. This is Vinho Verde." And for those who don't know what pet nat is, it stands for pétillant naturel, which is natural bubbly or natural bubbly wine. This one does have CO2 in it, but these are wines that were made with lower alcohol because they were harvested earlier. The fermentation period is not long. Their goal is not to have high alcohol wines. It's just to have wines that are almost like your backyard wine. You know, these are the wines that Luis's family, for example, his mother comes from an area from the north of Portugal, from this Vinho Verde area. Everyone has a plot of land with Vinho Verde grapes. Everyone is making their own artisanal wine in their backyard. This is the easiest thing to make. And we wanted to bring in a little bit of that feel, that kind of like, this is a fun, easy wine. This is not brain surgery, but it's also should not be uber sweet, and it should not be fully carbonated. So we brought in the white and the rosé. The white is made up of 3 grapes that are typical of Vinho Verde. One of them is Trajadura, that you now know all about. And then there's Arinto and Loredo. Loredo brings in the floral, the more floral. Arinto brings in a little bit more of that freshness, that acidity, that kind of that part of the wine. And then for the Sol Real Rosé, we worked with 2 grapes also of that region. So first is Espadeiro, which is one of the main red Vinho Verde grapes. And guess what the other red grape is? The most widely planted grape in Portugal, which is Touriga Nacional. So those are the 2 grapes in the rosé. And the rosé is made in the Provence style of rosé. The fermentation is very controlled because he again doesn't want this to happen spontaneously. And both of those grapes, Espadeiro and Touriga Nacional, have a lot of pigment in the skin, and he's very careful with temperature because he wants to keep it low enough that he can control the color. And so, ergo, we have Sol Real, white, and rosé, and I hope those will be landing there as well soon, because these wines are just, they're fantastic. They are so fun, and they're definitely a little different than the old school Regueiro Alvarinho Trajadura, which is much more elegant. And I would say that for the Regueiro, back to what we were talking about here, let me just go back. This Regueiro Alvarinho Trajadura, this is more like a Sauvignon Blanc, a dry Riesling. Like, this is the line of Regueiro Alvarinho Trajadura. And then Sol Real is like fun in a bottle, like a very different style of wine. But hopefully that'll land over there and sometime soon, and you guys can all enjoy a little bit of that too. So, tell me.
So, how, I mean, when you're going about looking for people to bring in, how have you done that? I mean, how did you end up searching these people out? Or, I mean, was it dumb luck to find Nuno, or do you have a tip to go look that way?
Oh, to finding these producers, you mean?
Yeah. How do you go about finding producers you want to bring in?
So it changed. I mean, I think that almost every single one of them came in a different way. You know, there was a group of producers that we were interested in. Even today, you know, we're reading the trade magazines in Portugal, but then we also have family and friends in Portugal, and someone will say, or we have producers who are already in Portugal who will say, I really think you should check out this person. Or something comes out in the national trade magazine in Portugal, and it's, you know, it's a small project, and we hear a little bit about it. We think let's contact them. And I think that it just comes from different areas. We do have a lot of luck that we have a direct connection with Portugal, so we have people who are always there. Sometimes we're there, but we have friends and family who are always there, and so being able to keep kind of a finger on what's happening is relatively easy. But we're also at a point, and we feel very lucky that we're also at a point where we get a lot of contacts. Like a lot of people are now seeking us out or finding us, you know, sending lovely emails like, there is a spot in your portfolio for our wine. It's like, well, maybe there is, or maybe there isn't. But we're getting a lot of inquiries. You know, when we started working with Portuguese wine here in the U.S. market now 8 years ago, we were one of the only importers that we only worked with indigenous grape varietals. We only worked with small boutique family estates. And fast forward to today, for example, in the New York market, we're the only importer that focuses exclusively on Portuguese wine, right? So with all of these things that we've kind of stayed this course for quite a while now, we're lucky that people are seeing us and finding us and you know, reaching out. And sometimes we find little gems. You know, there are a lot of producers that aren't the right fit for us. You know, producers who are bigger or who work with a lot of non-native grapes, or who you know, might not necessarily be working sustainably or cleanly in the vineyard. So, you know, we've kind of found a little niche, and sometimes, you know, and we find producers in so many different ways, which I sometimes feel it's weird. It's like, these are our producers, but in fact, they've become like partners and friends. And, you know, we know their children and their dogs, and their, you know, we've been building a relationship with a lot of them. And so they make us possible just as much as we make them possible. It's a really beautiful kind of symbiotic relationship.
One question here from someone was, do you work with any producers from Alentejo?
So, we currently don't work with from Alentejo. And there's one very simple reason for that, and I'll give you a little bit more of the background. But Alentejo planted a lot of international grape varietals. And so there are very few producers that work exclusively with indigenous grapes. So that's one of the main reasons. But the second reason is kind of back to my California analogy, is Alentejo gets a lot of sun. It's really, really hot. And it's not easy to find wines that are, or rather, we find a lot of wines that are very saturated. So very, the grapes ripen a lot, and so the juice, the wine is not really the style of what we're looking for, which is back to what I've been talking about: freshness, acidity, lifted, and that style of wine goes across our whole portfolio. And so in the Alentejo, we have found it's a little challenging, has been a little challenging for us to find a producer, the right fit for our book.
Okay, sorry for the delay. I had a fire truck going behind me there. I didn't feel like you guys needed to hear that.
You didn't want us all to hear that. Okay, that's nice.
I mean, you can hear it. It just is very obnoxious. So, one of the other, what about the Douro? Is that someplace that you guys have kind of looked? I mean, there's obviously a lot of indigenous grapes there, but it's a very different style from what, that kind of light and, fresh lifted characters that you were talking about. Is that something you guys have kind of looked for, or kind of?
So yes, so we do work with producers in the Douro. Right now, we're actually working with 2 producers in the Douro. One of them is someone we started a long time ago, a small family, but that we're not quite sure what their direction will be in the future. So not sure if they will stay in our portfolio in the future, but the other is a family that plants the vines very close to the river, and that's Quinta do Popa. And Quinta do Popa in the Douro has something very special to them, is that although it's a little altitude, just like the valley itself is kind of split into different areas. The river area lends a really interesting characteristic to the wines from Quinta do Popa. And Popa, the current generation, led by a cool guy called Stefan, he does not like working with oak. And so that was something that caught our interest. And so this is a producer who's been with us for now 8 years. And so his wines are super fresh. I mean, you would not think that this is Douro, because a lot of people think Douro and they think bigger bodied, heavier wines. I don't want to call it saturated, but just bigger wines. And his wines are so pretty. A little funkier because the vineyards are closer to the river, and so being close to the river, you get a kind of all the river. But very little oak is used. For example, their entry level only does it with stainless steel, and so that's most that kind of light. The next area we're going to look for in the Douro is Douro that has a little higher altitude. Altitude area of the Douro is no longer a Douro. It's not a DOC, but makes really, really beautiful, beautiful fresh wine.
Cool. Like I said yesterday, when we were on the phone, port kind of was my first love, and it's really inexplicable, but that's what happened. So I always like expanding my wine love of that area. Just, it's my longest drinking area, I guess, is how I'll put it. So I got to keep working with it.
Portugal.
Yeah. Are there any other questions?
There's so much, and I hope that today we get a little bit of it going, but lots of indigenous, really special regions, a lot of regional wines, again, as I mentioned, fresh wines, high acid, if you like acidity, like Portugal is your place. Wines, and incredible value for these wines, and just unbelievable value.
Definitely. It's really hard to beat, actually.
For the wines at all drinks. I'll stop sharing my screen. All right.
There you go. See if that cleans it up for a second there. Okay. Now, you were cutting out there.
I can't share my video anymore, but that's okay.
I stopped it there for a second because it was cutting out, so I was trying to let it catch up there. Question here is, what are the types of elevation changes that you're talking about? I guess even even in, in the Douro, but also maybe in Lisbon, what kind of altitude are we looking at? Since Lisbon's at sea level, what does the Romillo kind of come from? She says.
Okay, so we're talking, well, it varies a bit, but let's say we're going to 600 meters, or what is that in feet? That's like 600 times 3, 1,800 feet when we're talking in the Douro. In Lisbon, it drops a little bit, like it could be 300 or so, 400. I mean, it's not crazy elevation enough to be a huge change. Did you hear?
Yeah, mostly. So it sounds like we're talking like 300 to 400 meters, and then all the way up to maybe 600 meters. So like 18, somewhere between 900 and 1200 in the Douro, and maybe up to 1800 in some other places.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's significant, right? That's not an insignificant amount.
And it varies a lot. Portugal has a lot of different terroir. Back to the word terroir, so in the north, in the northeast, we have a lot of the mountains and hills. Around Lisbon, we have hills. In the Dow, we have hills. Vinho Verde is just like literally climbing up a mountain when you're going to the vineyard. So there is a lot of different elevation change, but there are some incredible properties that are practically at sea level. Oh, I get to start my video again. Thank you. All right, back. So there are a lot of properties that are also at sea level that bring in, other interesting traits. What we have just noticed is that with those properties that have elevation, you end up getting even more freshness in the wine. And the acidity really makes a big difference with aging.
Absolutely.
So if we're talking about grabbing wines that will do well in the long run, I'm going to look for tannins and I'm going to look for acidity. Tannins with Portugal, I'm zero worried about because every other grape in Portugal is super tannic. But acidity, we need to, look a little bit more. Along the coast, you're going to find a lot of wines that have tremendous acidity, freshness. But then on the continental side, so on the Spanish side of things, on the east side of Portugal, you need altitude. Otherwise, you're gonna have wines that have so much continental influence that are going to be very saturated wines, kind of like the oaky fruit bombs.
Right.
Sounds Spanish.
What I do? I don't know. Nothing. All right. Well, does anybody have any other questions they want to find out about Portugal before we let Naama get the kids to bed, maybe, or let her have a wine?
This one's already asleep, but it's like
Perfect.
So you guys remember? I remember falling asleep. It's like my mother's lap was the best place to fall asleep.
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely. More challenging when she's on a web call. Everybody's watching you, and you're just like, "Can you stop?"
Definitely.
Oh, perfect.
Oh man, yeah. Out.
He's out.
Love it.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed listening, and I could go on for a long time talking about Portugal. And I would love to get these other ones for anybody who wants them, and I'm looking forward to getting those other ones out here.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you for having me. Yay! I get some claps. Woo-hoo, woo-hoo, yeah. Woo-hoo, woo-hoo, woo-hoo.
I mean, you had a ton.
Party.
Great. It was great.
Yeah, totally. I want to be where you guys are. What's the party? I'm here. I have a sleeping child on me.